Well, welcome everyone. My name is Steve Grossman, and I have the privilege of serving as CEO of the Initiative for a Competitive Intercity, ICIC for short. I want to welcome you to this event, which will be an opportunity to showcase some of the pioneering research that ICIC has done during the last year, which showcases the economic impact of coronavirus on every community in America. Before I introduce our colleague Dobbin Bookman from the Harvard Business School, who will in turn give way to our research presentation, I want to express appreciation to my colleagues. I may be speaking here, but I speak on behalf of 41 members of the ICIC team who come together every day to provide education, coaching, technical assistance, access to capital to small business owners around the country. We're an organization that was started, as many of you know, back in 1994 by Dr. Michael Porter from Harvard Business School in the wake of the LA uprising of 1992. We started fundamentally as a research organization, and we remain true to those values, to thought leadership, ever since 1994. But we weave together thought and practice leadership, so not only do the things that we find in research strike a responsive chord among you and many others all over the country, but it also is work that has helped us create a series of urban business initiatives in which thousands of small businesses are participating both last year and this year. Thanks to my colleagues, Mike Shore, Director of Data Strategy and Innovation, to his colleague, V. Mai, who has played a key leadership role in putting this event together, Deputy Director of Data Strategy and Innovation, and to their colleague, our Senior Program Coordinator, Maria Galino, who's one of the main reasons why we've got 200 people registered for this event. Turning my attention to research, I want to thank our Director of Research, Dr. Howard Weil, and his colleagues, Peter Eberhardt and Devin Yee, for the research that they've done that is pioneering. And if you want to know more about our research, please go to our website, icic.org, because they've done a lot of other research on the nature of poverty in more than 450 under-resourced communities all over the country. Go to our website, you'll find it, and I think you'll benefit from it. But most of all, I want to thank the participants, because our participants from all over the country are the lifeblood of ICIC. You're our sponsors. You're our nominating partners. You recommend thousands of small businesses every day, every month, and during the year to participate in our programs, which is how we happen to serve almost 3,000 small businesses during 2020, during this pandemic, survive and thrive. So without any further delay, I want to introduce for some remarks my dear friend Dobbin Bookman. Dobbin Bookman runs the Harvard Business School's Global Owner, President, and Management Program, or OPM for short, which is geared to business owners and those from family businesses from around the world looking to develop their leadership skills and grow their business and grow their businesses. It's the heart and soul of the executive education program at Harvard Business School that Dobbin has been deeply involved with for many, many years. In addition to his broad responsibilities within HBS Executive Ed, he has served as a Harvard MBA career coach, an adjunct member of the HBS Career and Professional Development Program, Harvard Business Publishing's Corporate Learning Team, and an adjunct faculty at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Equally important, Dobbin is one of our go-to professors in the Intercity Capital Connections program. Many of you have seen him in action, teaching leadership development and talent management to small business owners all over the country. So Dobbin, thanks for your leadership, both at Harvard Business School and particularly for ICIC and the Intercity Capital Connections program. You're a dear, dear friend, and you represent the best of what business education can be. Our goal at ICIC is very simple. We want to attack and end poverty, concentrated poverty, and we want to close the racial wealth gap in America. That's what gets us up in the morning. I know that's what gets you up in the morning. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dobbin Bookman.
Thank you, Steve. It's just a delight. It's an honor. I'm blessed to count this as entering my 6th year with this fine initiative. And it is just tremendous work. It's great work. I thought that with the short time that I have with you all this afternoon, I would just give you a snapshot of a couple of things. First, I'm going to set a little context just using myself, and give you a little bit about kind of my background and how this work really is viscerally connected to kind of everything that I've kind of come to do for my entire life, really. And then I want to give you all just a snapshot of how we frame the work we do, particularly with the ICIC and ICCC, the Inner City Capital Connection. And so I'll give you a little bit of that as well. And then I'll leave you, well, I'll leave that to the end. I'll leave you kind of how I leave most of my sessions as well, with some things hopefully that may be useful to you and how you think about your own teams and your organizations. So just to kind of zoom back out and to give you just a little bit more about me and why this is important to me. I am, and some of this, Steve will know, some of this Steve may not know as well. I am intimately really related to both business and education. And so you heard Steve talk about my connections to, exec ed and HBS and my family for years. My parents, my grandparents are all educators. I also happen to also be African-American. People often see me and they wonder kind of, well, what is this guy? But I give you that for context for the moment that we're in this country and in the world. And for what this conversation is about, sort of leveling the playing field and specific to access to capital and opportunity. And so relative to my life at Harvard Business School and my family's involvement in education, my grandparents, and in business, I happen to as well be 3rd generation business owner in the Carolinas, where my family is from. I have not been involved in that business for all of my professional career. I have, been here in Boston, where I've spent my career and raised my family. And for all sorts of exciting reasons, I am, putting my hands on that business in a pretty meaningful way. And I mention that because the way that I am, really getting back involved is involved in a project that we're developing. And through having to, involve myself with the SBA, get really back into Main Street business and Main Street community relations and the stuff that we talk about all the time in our workshops. It's just reminded me, and that the challenges, I mean, I've gotten a grant, I've had to raise, meaningful sum of money in order to put this project together. And it's been an extraordinary, challenge. I've been, fortunate, I think, to be equipped with the tools, and that's where I think I want to lead into what we're about here, the tools to respond to the requests that were made, and not just the tools and the data, because that's one thing, but the profile, quite frankly, to qualify for some of the things that we're looking for. And that was just, I was reminded the entire time that, about how difficult it is for me and sort of who I am and my access to resources relative to people that we speak to and that I interface with every day. It just was really underscores and highlights this wonderful initiative, all the wonderful sponsorship that you all represent, all the nominations you represent, and just how important it is to really get out and address some of the challenges that are not just unique to small business, as many of them are, but unique to all business and folks that are trying to manage teams in times that are changing and uncertainty, which is certainly what the last 12 months has been characterized by. And so that, as well, is what we pin our our curriculum and our objectives on around ICCC and ICIC. So one of the things I thought I would do is just take a moment, and I'm going to share my screen. I have a couple of things I'm going to show you that I think will give you a sense of how we orient ourselves to the cohorts that we work with, and give you an idea of kind of how we focus things. So let me let me share this. See how we go here. So hopefully you can see my screen, and hopefully you can hear me. I saw something pop up to say unmute me, so I'm assuming that I had been muted, not been muted the entire time, or someone would have told me by now. But here's really a question that, and I love this, and this is how often we'll start our sessions, because I want to be very clear about the value proposition of ICCC and ICIC. And I want the folks that come to the program and that you sponsor and send to really appreciate how we have been quite deliberate in assembling what it is that we assemble. So this sort of illustrates how we think about that, and how we put folks who are in the cohort at the center, the business owner, and how we orient really a program around them that is specific to operational strategy, which is, you know, a key component of what we do in the program. Human capital strategy, which happens to be the area that I focus on, and that I think really is the largest asset in all of these businesses. And then, you know, of course, financial strategy, which enables, you know, both of the other two, and aligns both of the other two. And what I like people to take away from this before we even get involved in a deep way is an understanding of what the benefits are of doing this, and understanding this in a way that's aligned. And I use that word alignment a lot as well, because we speak about that and we teach really to that in the program. But if you look about sort of what this orientation does to folks who participate in the program, is it gives them an orientation towards a very clear direction, kind of what they see and what they want to be for their organization. It leads to high engagement, which, you know, is critically important in any organization, because that leads to retention. And the lack of that is detrimental, as I'm sure all of you know. And all of these things, by the way, and this is a theme of this, are independent of sort of pandemic times or times when things are catastrophic. These are fundamentals that serve well in those times, certainly, as you'll see, but serve well as fundamental underpinnings of solid core business best practice. And so that's what we teach to. And then proper alignment, again, there's that word. And so that's really the orientation that we start with. And then we move to asking really and having them to kind of look at themselves and how they spend their time in any given day, in any given week, and sort of where they see their allocation of personal resource being. And so typically folks can categorize all of their activities in any moment into one of these three domains. And so I start by asking them and making sure that they understand what each of the domains are, and what they represent in terms of the day-to-day operations and strategy of their business. And so once they get past that, then I ask them two questions, really. You know, where do you spend most of your time? And then I ask them, depending on what's going on, kind of how they shore that up. But in this moment of being post-pandemic and folks really having to have stepped up to new ways of doing things and interacting with their people, new ways of kind of planning, and certainly a new process of how to operate, I've asked them how this has shifted. And so that begins to uncover, you know, kind of how they have reacted and been creative to this situation. And we move into the principles behind, you know, the steps you take in order to be able to allow you to do this in a pretty methodical way. So that's the overall frame. And then if you kind of take a step back and figure out, okay, once you have an idea of that, we want them to clarify that really in writing. And so a lot of what we do is around workshops. It allows folks to kind of really put mind and pen to paper and think about how they're going to really operationalize what it is that we're saying. And so there are really three statements that we focus on. We have people really visualize what it is that they want to be, what their objective is, really the what of it is of the planning. We then have people really understand what their mission statement is, the reason that they exist, and then their values, understanding a little bit about their culture and how they do things. And you set these things in place, you understand them, and then they lead to systems, which are essentially tools in an organization that you can use in order to scale, in order to be efficient, in order to replicate in a way that is systematic. And so three tools or systems that come into play once you have a very clear sense of each of these statements and you've articulated that to your people is sort of strategic and operational planning. And you saw that in that first slide. You know, we talk about the strategy very clearly. The other two, quite frankly and quite honestly, are areas that people spend less time on. Number two, quality management protocols. It kind of comes organically. And then this last one, and certainly the last 12 months has highlighted this for most organizations, certainly the Harvard Business School and all organizations that I have been in touch with, this risk management piece and risk mitigation planning. You know, that's always been sort of a thing that people kind of have a one pager or just something that's one tab in a binder. But, you know, when you really think about what that means, knowing what you know now, going forward, that system is going to be critically important. It's always been important, but it's going to become critically important. So that's really these are the core fundamentals of how we orient to what it is that, you know, these businesses that I love to call Main Street businesses are dealing with, that again are not unique, but are things that are important, extraordinarily important to the small business. And once you sort of have that understanding and that sort of core, then we move into an ability to build systems that allow you to score where you are. And many of you may have heard of the balanced scorecard, and this is sort of very fundamental sort of template of that, but it allows you to take basically what was on the prior slide and begin to orient your measures and your activities along 4 dimensions relative to your customer base.
Dobbin, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just hoping we could, thank you very much for this. I'm hoping we can wrap up so we can get to the tool.
Yes.
So apologies.
Okay. I'm sorry. Okay, definitely. I apologize. What is the time here? I want to, how much time do I have left?
This, you know, if you can wrap it up in a minute or two, that would be great.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. I apologize.
Thank you.
So let me just kind of take you to where we sort of kind of fast forward to the key success factors and the things that are the core skills I think that are important and that remain important, you know, no matter where you are and what you're doing. And it's really these things. I'm not going to go through each of them just in the interest of the time there. I want to put them up here. I will make this available if folks are interested in it. But let me stop sharing, because for the last 30 seconds or so, I want to, you know, just sort of appeal to you in this one piece. I asked Michael and Steve and Diego when we were planning this a question, and my question was, you know, isn't the demand sort of for what it is that we're providing, you know, higher than our capacity to supply it? I would think that they're, given the cost of what it is that we're offering to these participants, which is really, you know, not much in terms of dollars, you would think, or I would have thought, that there would have been much less of a challenge in trying to find participants and garner folks to take advantage of this. And so the challenge and sort of the question I have for us is, oh, by the way, that's not the case. It is difficult, and Diego will tell you it is a challenge, and there are probably a lot of reasons for that. But I want to ask you all, and it's a rhetorical question for us to kind of think about together and how to solve it, but how do we bring access to this great work and the great tool that you're going to see, and the data, and apply it in ways that are more accessible to more people, because I think that's the key. So let me stop there. I apologize for running. I want to get straight to Howard, and I look forward to hearing it myself and hearing what you all have to say about it. Thank you for the time.
Thanks very much, Dobbin. I'm going to talk today about a very different kind of scorecard, one that's about neighborhood economic vulnerability to the ongoing impacts of the coronavirus crisis. And I'll talk about, well, what we in ICIC Research did and why we did it. And then I'll turn it over to my colleagues, Peter Eberhardt and Devin Yee, to show you how you can use what we did. Next slide, please. So to begin, this is going to be, especially in the later sections, a highly locally relevant presentation. So it would be useful to find out where everyone is from. If you could type in the chat your city and state, we'll get an idea of that. St. Louis, Boston, Buffalo, Baltimore, Charlotte, Colorado, New Mexico, DC, LA, Pittsfield, Massachusetts, more LA, more Boston, more LA, Seattle, Atlanta, more Washington, Denver, Long Island, Minneapolis, Houston, more Denver, more DC. Looks like we have a good geographic representation here, and you'll see later on how what we do can be relevant to you in your local areas. We created a report, and more importantly for today's purposes, an interactive map last spring, close to the beginning of the coronavirus crisis, to help local organizations, people like yourselves and your organizational partners, assess the neighborhoods whose residents are most likely to suffer from the medium and even long-term economic impacts of the coronavirus crisis. So we created this tool for people like you and your organizational partners, whether you are in state or local government or an anchor organization or philanthropy or a small business assistance provider, or an economic development or community development organization. You're the kinds of people we want to be able to use this tool, and we think can use this tool to your benefit and to the benefit of the people and businesses that you serve. We focused on economic vulnerability, the loss of things like income, jobs, and housing. Not really health vulnerability per se, except as it leads to the loss of things like income, jobs, or housing. There are plenty of other people who are looking at health vulnerability, and health vulnerability is also something that changes a lot from day to day and week to week. So we are not looking at coronavirus cases, we're not looking at hospitalization rates, we're not looking at fatalities from the virus. We are looking at medium and long-term economic vulnerability to the effects of the crisis. Because we know that the economic impacts of the crisis are not going to stop when the virus itself is contained. We're not going to flip a switch or wave a magic wand and suddenly go back to normal or the new normal or whatever happens after the virus. Instead, the impacts of the virus crisis are likely to be protracted, and that's likely to be especially true for low-income people, people of color, and the businesses that they own and that serve their neighborhoods. So we want to be comprehensive, we want to be locally relevant, we want to be locally relevant for the entire country. So we took a look at every neighborhood in the country. There are more than 70,000 of them throughout the country, and created an economic vulnerability score and provided economic vulnerability data for each of those neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So our economic vulnerability index is based on 5 factors. One of them is the percentage of people who live in the neighborhood who work in industries whose jobs were most affected and we think are going to continue to be most affected by the virus crisis. The others are lack of access to a car, percent who don't have access to a car, percent who don't have access to the internet, percent who pay more than 30% of their income toward housing, and percent who don't have health insurance. I'll say a little bit about each of these. Back when we created this reported map last spring, we had to make educated guesses about which industries were not only likely to lose jobs during the crisis, but which industries were likely to suffer long-term job losses or long-term job recompositions as a result of the crisis. And I think the educated guesses that we made actually hold up pretty well, even now when it's almost a year into the crisis. As of January of this year, which is the last month for which data are currently available. The nation as a whole had 94% of the jobs that it had last February, back when just before the virus crisis started. For most of the industries on our list, mining, quarrying, oil and gas, arts, entertainment and recreation, accommodation and food services, and at least some of the key parts of transportation, such as airlines and passenger rail and local public transportation, taxi cabs and ride sharing, those recovery percentages are a lot lower than the national percentage. For retail trade, that's not the case. Retail trade is doing overall a little bit better than the country as a whole in bringing back jobs, even though that wasn't the case early on in the crisis. There's been a little bit of a shift in the direction of online retail, a little bit less toward bringing back people to serve customers directly. But the most important thing that's been going on in retail, and the reason why we have it on our list even now, is that the coronavirus crisis accelerated trends within retail that were going on, trends toward automation, trends toward eliminating direct customer service jobs and replacing those customer service functions with technology. Those trends were given a big push by the coronavirus crisis, and therefore many of the people who used to work in retail may no longer have jobs in retail, even if the overall job numbers look pretty good. The other risk factors that we look at, lack of access to a car, obviously a big risk factor, hard to get to work if you don't have access to a car, especially if you don't have access to public transportation, or public transportation is not running on the kind of schedule that it was running on before the crisis, or you're just concerned about virus safety during the crisis if you use public transportation. Lack of access to the internet, another huge economic vulnerability factor, even more so now during the crisis than it was before. Internet access is a necessity now if you want to be able to work from home, if that's an option for you, if you want to have access to telemedicine, if you want to have access to online schooling, if you want to have access to even basic public services and meet some of your basic public obligations. Not having internet is a big problem. For example, this year, it's going to be very, very hard to pay your federal income taxes or get your earned income tax refunds if you don't have access to the internet. Housing cost burden, obviously a huge factor as well. If you have any other unexpected expenses and you're paying too much of your income toward housing, that housing cost burden is what's going to flip you over the edge toward personal economic crisis. And housing cost burden is likely to be a bigger and bigger factor as we start to move out of the crisis itself, because as the eviction moratoriums start to expire, people are going to owe lots of back rent that they're not going to be able to pay. So that's a huge problem, one that public policy has not really started to deal with yet. Finally, lack of health insurance, huge problem, whether you get the virus or have other health vulnerabilities. Lack of health insurance may not be a problem for the very poorest people because they often have access to Medicaid, but it is a big problem for the working poor who have low-wage jobs that don't offer health insurance. Then they just don't have any health insurance. So we took all 5 factors, put them together, ranked each neighborhood on those 5 factors, divided the neighborhoods into groups of 1/10 each, so about 70 or so neighborhoods, or about 700 rather, neighborhoods in each group. We assigned the least vulnerable neighborhoods a value of 1. We assigned the most vulnerable neighborhoods a value of 10. And we considered neighborhoods that rank 8, 9, or 10 on our index to be highly vulnerable. And those are the ones that we and you should be most concerned about. Next slide, please. National findings overall, very simple to state. First of all, high poverty neighborhoods, which we defined as those with poverty rates of 20% or more, are the ones that are most economically vulnerable. Second, economic vulnerability is concentrated in neighborhoods of color. And third, even among high poverty neighborhoods, it's the neighborhoods of color that are the most vulnerable. So poverty and race are 2 separate factors that make for economic vulnerability, but in high poverty neighborhoods of color, they interact and reinforce each other and make high vulnerability neighborhoods even more vulnerable. Next slide, please. So to see a little bit about how this plays out in one local area, let's take a look at Hartford, Connecticut, and its neighboring, largely working class suburb of East Hartford. Hartford has 40 neighborhoods. Almost all of them we ranked as highly vulnerable. Almost all of them have majority of their residents being people of color. Almost 3/4 of them are high poverty, and a majority, 55%, are highly vulnerable and have majority people of color and are high poverty neighborhoods. So the national trends play out in a very obvious way in the city of Hartford. In East Hartford, maybe a little bit less so, but the important thing to note is that even there, of the 14 neighborhoods, 3 are highly vulnerable, and all 3 of those are high poverty neighborhoods. So you can see the relationship between poverty and economic vulnerability in East Hartford as well. Next slide, please. So here you see what our map tool looks like on the ground in Hartford and East Hartford. Hartford is for those of you who aren't from there, is the area outlined in black on the left side of the map to the west of the Connecticut River. East Hartford is just across the river on the right side of the map. Neighborhoods that are shown in gold or orange are high poverty neighborhoods. Those that are shown in blue are low poverty neighborhoods, meaning simply that they have poverty rates below 20%. You can see here that there is a large area of high poverty neighborhoods that are also highly vulnerable in the city of Hartford, and that next door to them, there are a number of low poverty neighborhoods that are also highly vulnerable. And what's probably going on with those neighborhoods is that they have poverty rates below 20%, but maybe not much below 20%. They might have 17, 18, 19% poverty rates. And so they are going to rank high on many of our vulnerability factors. Next slide, please. So our key takeaways, we need to target economic assistance to highly vulnerable neighborhoods and the people who live there. We also need to assist businesses and their employees, especially if they are in vulnerable industries. Third, we need affordable, universal internet access. Fourth, we need affordable universal health insurance. And fifth, we need to improve housing affordability, not only in places with very, very expensive housing like Boston and New York and San Francisco, but also in other parts of the country where housing may be less expensive, but incomes are even lower, so that affordability is still a big problem. And there's one more takeaway that I want to highlight that we had no idea about when we started this work last year, but has become very apparent in the course of the last month as vaccines have started to be rolled out. It's become obvious that among people in the priority groups for receiving the vaccines, people of color are having a harder time getting access to vaccines than white people have. And that's in part due to the fact that people of color are less likely to have access to a car, less likely to have access to the internet, so it's harder for them to sign up for vaccine appointments, and sometimes it's harder for them to get to vaccine appointments. Well, here's where our map can, and the data that we show on our map can really help you. You can look at our highly vulnerable neighborhoods and target vaccine recipients in those neighborhoods. So if you're in the public sector and you don't feel that you can target directly by race, you can use our mapping tool and our information, and you will be getting at neighborhoods of color where people are most in need of the vaccine, but are not getting that access. And with that, I'll wrap it up and turn the floor over to my colleague, Peter Eberhard.
Thanks, Howard. So I'm going to go ahead and change the screen share so that we can all take a look at the mapping tool as it looks online. I will spend about 5 minutes or so just providing an introduction to how to use the tool, how to go over it and interpret what you're seeing, and then another 5 minutes or so going over a sample city that we'll pull people on to get interest for. So when you open up the web-based tool, the interactive map, this is the screen that you will see. It defaults to loading up a map of Boston, Massachusetts, but as Howard mentioned, this map includes 70,000 neighborhoods across the country and in all 50 states. So this is just we had to pick a home screen, and because we're based in Boston, that made a lot of sense for us. So you can search and move around in this tool, very similar to Google Maps or another online mapping software, so that you can look at any place that you're interested in. To start to interpret the data and what you're seeing here, right away off the bat, you can see that neighborhoods are color-coded in different colors, and the boundaries of those neighborhoods are indicated by these gray borders between them. As Howard mentioned, the low poverty neighborhoods, meaning those that have a poverty rate below 20%, are colored in shades of blue, and high poverty neighborhoods, meaning those that have a poverty rate above 20%, are shaded in shades of yellow and orange. Additionally, the darkness of the shade, or how dark the color is, indicates the economic vulnerability of these neighborhoods. So these light blue neighborhoods that you see on the left side of the screen, near where it says Newton and Watertown, those would be low vulnerability neighborhoods according to the index. They would score in this 1 to 3 category. By contrast, these dark blue neighborhoods in the Allston-Brighton neighborhood of Boston, as well as over here near the downtown area and Boston's Chinatown, would be low poverty neighborhoods, but are scoring higher on the vulnerability index and would be in that top category. So with those things in mind, when you look at a city like Boston here, for example, you can see that there is a fairly sizable concentration of high poverty and high vulnerability neighborhoods south of sort of the downtown area that's up here and the Charles River. And this would be largely the Roxbury and Mattapan neighborhoods in Boston. And then you can see how that pattern varies as we enter into the Allston-Brighton neighborhood that I mentioned, where you have low poverty tracts that are still high vulnerability. So as Howard said, potentially neighborhoods that are just below that threshold of 20%, but still scoring fairly high on the individual metrics. To learn more, to view more detail and data about a specific neighborhood, all you have to do is hover your mouse over whichever neighborhood you're interested in and click once. If you double click, it'll zoom in, but if you click once, you'll get this pop-up window that has a whole bunch of data about the neighborhood and the specific factors that either increase or decrease vulnerability. So just quickly going through what's available to you. There's this census tract name. That's just the formal name of the neighborhood and probably isn't very relevant unless you are looking to pull extra data, additional data, or refer to it in a written piece and want to be really formal about it. Then we have the economic vulnerability score, which is the score on the index that Howard mentioned. So this neighborhood has a vulnerability score of 10, meaning that it is in the top 10% most vulnerable neighborhoods in the entire country. So a good thing to keep in mind with this data is that it's all in relation to the whole country, not just to the specific area. So when a neighborhood scores 10, that means it's in the roughly 700 neighborhoods in the country that we define as being most vulnerable. Then we also have a description of the poverty status, which is what you see in the color coding, as well as a summary level description of the demographics. So you can see that this neighborhood is majority people of color. And then we also have metrics like total population, median household income, the poverty rate, the actual detailed percentage of residents who are people of color, advanced educational attainment through a bachelor's degree or higher, and then the specific metrics that go into the index. So the percent of households that do not have a car. In this neighborhood, you can see it's just over 50%. The percent of employment that's in threatened industries, the percent of households without internet, percent of cost-burdened households, excuse me, and the percent without health insurance. So you can access all of this very quickly by just clicking on a neighborhood that you're interested in. And all of this data is from the 2018, the most recent 5-year census, the data that's available for the neighborhoods. So it is still very relevant and most likely the most recent data and will be relevant for at least the foreseeable future. So beyond just looking at a neighborhood and the data for it, another handy thing that you can do is look up a specific address. So if you want to know the address of a business and if it's in a high poverty, high vulnerability neighborhood, you can just look it up in the search bar in the top right corner here. So I'm going to, as an example, quickly look up 56 Warren Street in Roxbury, which is ICIC's physical office. Obviously, we are not there at the moment, but that is where our physical office would be. So I will just click on that and wait for it to load. So you can see here that once it loads, there is a search box with just the address, just to confirm that that's actually the one you want. And then there's a little arrow that points to where the address would be. If you want, it zooms in pretty close. So if you want to pull back out and get a sense of where it lies in the neighborhood, you can click on the zoom in and out buttons over here, which will show you, which will be a little bit better than scrolling with your mouse. It's just a little, the mouse can be a little sensitive, so you may jump way out and go too far. So you can see from this demo that ICIC's office is located in this neighborhood here in Boston's Roxbury, larger Roxbury community and neighborhood. And you could access the data for that particular neighborhood by just clicking once on in the neighborhood. So that is a quick demo and run through of how you can interpret this data, look at the map and start to interact with it. And if you hit the home button, just know that it will always take you back to that default screen of Boston. So just be careful if you're over here when you've already searched for another city. And then next, I will set out a poll for all of you. So you'll see a poll pop up on your screen, and it would be great to get as many responses as possible so that we can do a city demo, not of Boston, but of another city, and go over some of the neighborhoods there. So I will set up that poll and release it now. All right, great. We're getting some responses. Please make sure to click on the response buttons in the poll and not in the chat. I won't be able to see the chat. So this poll is the best way to get your opinion in. Great, still have some coming in. So I'll give it another 5 or so seconds to get some votes in, and then whichever city has the most votes, we will do a quick demo of that. Okay, I will wrap up polling now. And it looks like Baltimore in Maryland had the most votes. So I will pull that up. And the best way to go about searching for a new city is to look in this search bar here. You could zoom in and out and move around, but it'll just take a little bit longer most likely. So the best way is to search through the search bar. So I will give the map a second to load. That's an important point here. It's a lot of data, 70,000 neighborhoods all across the country. And as you saw, there are lots of data points for each neighborhood. So it can take a second to fully load. But it looks like we are just about fully loaded, and Baltimore has some pretty well-defined city boundaries. So not all cities are going to, but Baltimore just happens to have some well-defined city and county boundary lines. So you can see that this rough top of the square here is roughly the east, west, and north borders of Baltimore, and then it wraps down around the harbor and the inner harbor. So looking at first glance at Baltimore, we can see that there are large concentrations of high poverty and high vulnerability neighborhoods, both west of the center line and east of that center line. Among those, or mixed in with those, there are also low poverty, high vulnerability neighborhoods, likely, as Howard said, and as I said earlier with Boston, those are neighborhoods where the poverty rate is maybe 18% or something similar, and just misses that cutoff, but still scores fairly highly on our different metrics. And now to talk about a couple specific neighborhoods in Baltimore really quickly. We'll look at this census tract right here. It's a fairly thin census tract, and as you can see, there are about 1,000 people living in this neighborhood. $18,000 is the median household income annually. This tract is majority people of color and has a poverty rate, not including undergraduate and graduate students, of 48%. So almost 50% of the people living in this neighborhood are in households where the household income is below the national poverty line. You can see here, there are about, the percentage of residents who are people of color is 95%. And there is only 3.8%, about 4% of neighborhood residents have a bachelor's degree or higher. 14% are employed in those industries that are most threatened by the virus crisis. And then some of the more concerning metrics looking at this particular neighborhood would be the percent without a car, over just about 68%, and the percent without internet, 57%. So a majority of people, of households in this neighborhood do not have internet access, which as we all can imagine, after this last year, would make it difficult to participate in remote employment, remote school, or even now to find information about vaccines and healthcare, as well as to make an appointment to get a vaccine or to get healthcare. And then similarly, that high share of households that don't have a car would mean that people are very reliant on public transit or friends and family who may have a car. So again, that is an additional barrier and challenge during this crisis. And then final data point I wanted to highlight on this neighborhood, and then I'll turn it back to Howard, is that 65% of households in this neighborhood are cost burdened, meaning that they pay over a third, over 30% of their income to housing, either mortgage or rent, which given the median household income of $18,000 a year in this neighborhood means that there's likely not much wiggle room if people lose employment or have hours reduced during this crisis and recession. So every neighborhood, all 70,000 neighborhoods in the country could get their own analysis and review of the different data points here. But we hope that this was a helpful introduction to how to use the tool, what you can access with it. It's not just this vulnerability score, but also these detailed data points about specific metrics that are relevant more broadly to a whole class of people, as Howard said, policymakers, small business assistance providers, community organizations. So with that, I will turn it back to Howard.
Thanks, Peter. So we've got a number of questions from participants, and I will be the gatekeeper of those questions. But I think that many, if not all of them, would be ones that Devin would be best suited to answer. So the first question was, what are the main sources of data for mapping, and how often are the data updated? So Devin, fill everyone in on that, please.
All right, so as Peter had mentioned, our sources of data was the 2014 to 2018 American Community Survey 5-year data. And so that's all publicly available data from the census. And so that is our data sources. And those are where we pulled the data per each neighborhood or tract for our key indicators.
Great. Thanks. So another question was, were many or any areas noted to be high poverty and low vulnerability? Yes, there were some neighborhoods like that. You could see some of them in the cities that that Peter did demos on. Number 3, are you able to look at neighborhoods by name? Devin, can you handle that one, please?
Yeah, so I think if we're experimenting with Boston, if you search Roxbury, I'm going to just do this right now to double check. I think you would pull up the Roxbury area. So you do something like that, though as I'm pulling it up, it's actually kind of under Nubian Square. And so something of note that I was actually saw yesterday, because this is kind of related to neighborhood boundaries and the difference between this and census tract boundaries, which is they're not the same. And, if people are living in a certain neighborhood, and for example, Roxbury and the borders of Roxbury, if we're thinking about that data nationally, there isn't something like that nationally where we have data available of the different neighborhoods for people. However, like when we're using this map, it should hopefully be smart enough to know generally the area of that neighborhood. And so at least in Roxbury. Am I missing any other piece of this question?
I think that's it. Related question, is there a way to aggregate the census tracts inside a neighborhood? So like to get results for Roxbury as a whole, as opposed to just individual census tracts?
I can also take that as it's a little bit of a related question to the last one. Yes, you can do that, but that's not a capability of the mapping tool. So, for example, also if you're looking at a certain neighborhood, I was actually a couple of days ago, there was a question that had come up about this on the census Slack, but you can essentially figure out where the borders of that neighborhood is, and you could use the census tracts underlying and the underlying data of the census tract.
Great. Is each neighborhood equivalent to one census tract? Yes, it is. That's what we mean by a neighborhood is a census tract. Next question is, if you wanted to pull all the Baltimore neighborhoods that had vulnerability scores of 10, could you do this and get all the underlying data points like poverty rates and all the other components of our index? Devin, what's the answer to that one?
Yes, that's also possible, though it's not a capability of the mapping tool. So in terms of being able to search for something like select all the neighborhoods that have the vulnerability score of 10, but you could do that interactively as you're looking at the map. And I don't know if Peter has anything to add to this one.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is we'd encourage people to reach out if you hit a limit of this online mapping tool and you want to get more data. We're obviously sharing all this data, and so please do feel free to reach out to us, and we can sort of talk about if there's additional information that we can get you that's not straight from this platform.
Great. Final question. Some neighborhoods are going through gentrification. How is that addressed? That's, of course, an enormous problem in quite a few big cities and inner suburbs throughout the country. The data are lagged. As Peter said, our data pertain to 2018. That's the most up-to-date data you can get at the census tract level. So that's something of a limitation of what we have. If neighborhoods started to gentrify just over the last couple of years, we're not going to pick that up. Fortunately, gentrification is usually a somewhat longer-term process. So if we can't pick up the early stages of it, at least we're picking up and making sure that we don't count as high poverty neighborhoods that have been gentrifying for a long time. But there is that trade-off between being able to get hyper-local data at the neighborhood level and being able to be really current about gentrification. Yes, we cover every census tract in the country. We've said that. And finally, will we share a CSV of data for all census tracts in the U.S.? Devin, what's the answer to that one?
I mean, I think this is referring to our economic vulnerability index. I think it's kind of a similar question of, I mean, in terms of this isn't directly available on the mapping tool, but it's something that can be done. And so send that inquiry to.
Thanks, Devin. So if you have any additional questions, please feel free to email me. You can see my email address on the final screen. We're almost at time, so I just want to turn it back over to Steve Grossman for some closing remarks.
Thanks, Howard. Thanks to you, to Peter, and to Devin for the presentation. Obviously, this is a very complex and enormously valuable tool, and our colleague Maria Galino will be sending an email out to all participants following this event and sharing a variety of material that you can take advantage of, the coronavirus report, a link to the interactive map, Dobbin Bookman's notes and slides from the earlier presentation, and information as to whom you could contact at ICIC. We want to thank all of you for participating, for being with us, for being the nominating partners, for being the sponsors, for sending small businesses to us that are desperate for technical assistance, for coaching, for webinars, for all the things that we provide, including access to capital. These research tools will help policymakers throughout the country make key decisions to help those who are in need. Our goal at ICIC is twofold: to end concentrated poverty, to close the racial wealth gap, and these 8s, 9s, and 10s, the ones that are most vulnerable, are the ones where we focus an enormous amount of our time and attention. So thanks to V, thanks to Maria, thanks to Mike, to my colleagues in research. Please come back again. We'll be running a number of other events like this to present research and research findings, which we know is critical to the work that all of you do. Be well, have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks so much for being with us.